In the heart of 15th century France, when the land was split by sword and faith, a child was born beneath the shadow of a crumbling banner. His name was Gilles de Rais, heir to vast estates, to gold and soldiers, to a world that bent its knee before men of noble blood. The walls of his childhood home were cold stone veined with candle smoke. He learned early that fear could serve where love would not. They taught him to pray before he could write his name, to bow before saints whose faces stared down from painted glass. The priests spoke of purity and penance. The knights spoke of valor and blood. Between them, the boy grew clever and silent, memorizing both the Psalms and the art of killing. When his father fell in war and his mother died soon after, the orphaned lordling inherited more land than mercy. His guardians fed him ambition instead of kindness, and ambition bloomed like rot behind a polished smile. The years hardened him. He learned the weight of armor, the sting of iron in the air before battle. France itself was fractured, its crown contested by foreign kings. To the west, the sea beat against Breton cliffs. Inland, fields lay trampled beneath endless campaigns. Yet even in ruin the nobles feasted, and Gilles de Rais was always seated near the head of the table, young, handsome, gilded, the promise of his house. Then the rumors spread of a maiden who heard the voice of heaven, Jeanne la Pucelle, Joan of Arc, a peasant girl who claimed that angels commanded her to drive the English from France. Many mocked her, others feared her. Gilles, barely 20, saw her and believed, or wished to. Something in her unshakable faith stirred what little light remained in him. When she rode to Orléans, he followed. War turned him into legend. Witnesses spoke of a knight whose armor shone blue as a stormed sea, who rode beside the maid through smoke and arrow fire. Under her banner, France began to win again, and the people whispered that God had returned to their side. Gilles de Rais knelt beside Joan in prayer, swore oaths of purity and vengeance, and for a brief season his heart beat in time with hers. But heaven is cruel in its favors. Joan was taken, tried as a heretic, and burned. The fire that consumed her seemed to extinguish something holy in Gilles. He watched from afar as her ashes rose on the wind, and the prayers died on his tongue. When the war quieted, he returned home a hero wrapped in silence. His castles became theaters of distraction. He filled them with musicians and painted saints, with actors who reenacted the triumphs of Joan, as though applause might raise her from the dead. Gold spilled faster than rain from his treasuries. Banquets lasted for days. Priests were paid to bless the wine. Yet when the torches guttered and the guests departed, Gilles was alone with the dark. The chronicles say he turned to alchemists next, men who promised to conjure wealth from dust, to summon spirits that obeyed no church. Within hidden chambers he studied forbidden texts, tracing sigils by candlelight. Some nights he prayed aloud to angels, others to whatever might answer. The servants began to whisper. In the villages below his walls, children disappeared. First one, then another. They were boys mostly, the sons of peasants, small and hungry, drawn to the castle by promises of bread and coin. Their mothers waited by doorways until the stars went out. None returned. At first, the disappearances were blamed on war, on wolves, on wandering soldiers. But the peasants heard laughter echoing from the towers at night. a laughter that did not sound like joy. They saw fires burning at strange hours, smelled pitch and ash drifting from the chimneys. Still no one spoke the Lord's name aloud. To accuse a noble was to invite ruin. Inside, the truth festered. Witnesses later swore that Gilles de Rais held revels not meant for mortal eyes, that he called the children to him kindly, then locked the doors, that he watched the life leave them with a painter's fascination, searching for beauty in the instant of death. He spoke of sacrifice, of the philosopher's stone, of bargains struck in Latin whispers. When guilt stirred, he silenced it with gold. When fear came, he answered with prayer twisted into blasphemy. How long this horror lasted, none can say. Years, perhaps, the number of victims lost to ash and rumour. Yet even monsters grow careless. During a quarrel with a cleric, Gilles seized a priest by force, and that single act drew the gaze of the church. Soldiers came not as guests, but as judges. They searched his halls and found the remnants of children among the soot. Bones, charred cloth, silence heavy enough to crush the breath. He was taken to Nantes for trial. At first, he stood proud, denying all. The court read the charges: murder, heresy, invocation of demons. He smiled at them, noble and unrepentant. But the testimonies mounted, servants weeping, priests trembling, accomplices confessing. The mask cracked. On the third day he wept too. On the fourth, he confessed. He spoke of lust for knowledge, of despair, of voices that promised gold if he would only give them innocence in return. He told the judges he had sought to recreate divine creation, to glimpse the secret of life itself, and in doing so had destroyed it. The hall was silent when he finished. On the morning of October 26th, 1440, they led him to the gallows outside Nantes. The crowd was vast, mothers clutching charms, soldiers staring as if into a mirror of their own sins. Gilles walked calmly, dressed in black, carrying a crucifix. Before the rope tightened, he asked forgiveness of God and of the parents whose children he had taken. Some said his voice broke, others said he smiled. When the fire was lit beneath him, he made no sound. They buried the ashes beyond the walls, unmarked. Yet the story would not stay buried. The smoke of his burning had scarcely cleared when the city returned to its business. Yet the air itself seemed changed. The market women crossed themselves when the wind shifted from the river. The children were told not to wander near the place of execution. For weeks, the scaffold remained standing, blackened and glistening with rain, a silent warning to every soul who thought himself above heaven's law. But the warning did little. Men forget quickly when forgetting is convenient. The Duke counted his share of the condemned man's lands. The Church recorded another victory over heresy, and the peasants, who had lost the most, were left to till the same blood-soaked earth. Only the stories remained, spreading from hearth to hearth like sparks on straw. Some said Gilles' ashes refused to cool, that the ground itself smoked for days. Others swore they saw a shape walking the battlements of Tiffauges on moonless nights, tall, cloaked, carrying something small and limp in its arms. When dogs howled without cause, the villagers whispered his name and shut their doors. Time, that great eraser, did not wholly succeed in erasing him. Chroniclers argued, priests embellished, poets twisted his tale into caution and legend. The truth lay buried somewhere beneath both horror and need. Horror at what he had done, and need for the comfort of explanation. It was easier to call him monster than to see the reflection of man. Yet before his name curdled into myth, there was a final echo. A boy who had served in his kitchens came forward years later, grey and trembling. He told that in the last days before the arrest, the Lord had grown quiet, almost gentle, as though haunted by what even he could not bear. He spoke to the walls, the old servant said, asking forgiveness of the stones. Whether guilt or madness, no one could tell. Centuries passed. France changed kings, changed creeds, changed everything but its appetite for stories. Gilles de Rais became a ghost housed in paper. His castles crumbled, their towers split by ivy. Pilgrims visited the ruins not to pray, but to listen, to hear if the stones still remembered. Some claimed they heard weeping under the wind, others only silence. The scholars of later ages sifted through the records, puzzled by the contradictions. The court's transcripts read like theatre. The witnesses contradicted themselves. The church had much to gain from spectacle. Was he truly the fiend described, or had greed sharpened the quill? The answer, perhaps, lies somewhere between truth and necessity, but the bones found in the ashes speak more clearly than parchment. Still, there is a cruel symmetry in his tale. The man who once guarded the Maid of Orleans, the virgin saint of light, became the dark parody of her faith. Where she heard voices of angels, he sought whispers of demons. Where she burned for belief, he burned for power. Together they formed the mirror of an age, one sanctified by fire, the other consumed by it. In the quiet centuries that followed, the tale shifted again. Mothers frightened children with it. Playwrights dressed it in velvet and rhyme. And somewhere, a storyteller began a new version, the one that speaks of Bluebeard, of a lord who killed his wives and hid their bodies behind a forbidden door. The names changed, but the echo was his. For evil, once given a voice, rarely goes silent. And so, his shadow lingers in the corners of French memory, in the villages of Brittany, where mist clings to the marshes and bells toll low across the fields. When storms roll in from the sea, the lightning shows the silhouettes of ruined towers against the sky, and the locals murmur that the night is riding again, searching for forgiveness he will never find. Historians will argue forever whether he was demon or man, victim of politics or of himself. Yet one truth remains beyond dispute. Faith and power, bound without mercy, can breed a darkness deeper than the grave. In that darkness, Gilles de Rais built his kingdom, brick by brick, until it buried him whole. Sleep well, if you can. Centuries later, his story still endures, not because the world delights in horror, but because it recognizes itself within it. The same hunger for purity that made saints also forged inquisitors. The same ambition that built cathedrals, built the pyres beneath them. Gilles de Rais stands as a reminder that virtue without humility becomes corruption, that faith without mercy becomes cruelty, and that every age, however enlightened, breeds its own shadows. History does not banish the dark, it merely learns to name it. Sleep well, if you can.